Incredibly happy to be here on this historic night, just an incredible main event. Before we get started, I want to thank a few people and organizations. First of all, I want to thank the Marvel Stadium that hosted this event here in Melbourne. An incredible facility, and the team here was first class, so happy to be back here. Also, I want to thank our partners from the sports ministry, Martin Pakula, and of course Visit Victoria, Chairman Peter Bingaman. Without Visit Vic, we would absolutely not be here, and we couldn't be prouder to be partnered with them. Historic event here tonight in Melbourne. The gate tonight was approximately 8 million Australian dollars, 5.5 million US. Attendance, you've already heard this from Dana White, but in excess of 57,000, 57,127. And as far as the bonuses, I think everyone can probably guess fight of the night was Malarkey versus Riddell. That was incredible. And of course, the performance of the night, we had De Castro and of course Israel Adesanya with an incredible win. I'll be happy to take a couple of questions if you've got them.
Yeah, the attendance, not to be a downer, it looked there were some empty seats in there tonight. I don't remember seeing those as much in the Rousey Holm fight. Is the 57,000, is that verified?
Yes, it's well, first of all, there were, if you probably remember this, maybe you blocked it out of your mind, but there certainly were some empty seats in the Rousey event. Obviously, big arena, and of course, we couldn't fill every seat, but yes, that's the number we're counting.
Fair enough.
Put them all up.
I wanted to ask you about the entrance, just the decision tonight to have Israel, have that entrance that he had. Typically that's not something we see in a UFC event. So I'm curious what kind of discussions were had behind the scenes. Concerns for his well-being on the way to the cage, and to come to that decision that we're going to let this guy do this.
Yeah, I don't know if there were any concerns for his well-being, but of course, that was specifically approved by Dana. Dana typically does not allow things like that, but he allowed it in this occasion. I thought it was great. I mean, I thought the intro was incredible, and obviously a great event following that incredible intro. Yeah,
and a star-making performance for Israel. I'm curious, as a company, you take like Conor McGregor, who was an international superstar. Ireland didn't have venues big enough for him, right? So he ends up fighting in the States. We think of Vegas as the home and where the biggest fights are, Madison Square Garden, that sort of thing in New York. But with Israel and having a venue like this here in Australia, do you foresee his future being able to hold, additional title fights here in the market versus being forced to fight abroad?
Listen, I think Israel Adesanya can fill stadiums anywhere in the world. There's no doubt that this guy's going to be a huge star. He's incredibly charismatic. He's got a fighting style that is really, really interesting, and he's got an incredible personality. So I think you're going to see him involved in a lot of big events in Vegas, in Australia. Who else? Who knows where else? But a lot of big events for this guy in his future.
I know matchmaking's not your strong suit, but listen, he's talking about John Jones. Of course, Paulo Costa was there cage side. Have you got any feedback from the matchmakers or from Dana, I should say, about what his next fight would be? Would it be the Paulo Costa fight, or are we thinking outside the box and other possibilities?
I'm not going to step on Dana's toes when it comes to matchmaking, so I think you'll have to ask him. But yeah, I think you're heading in the right direction, certainly. Costa was obviously here, and that's interesting. But I'm going to leave that one up to Dana and the matchmakers.
Thanks. And last thing from me, Lawrence, a big event here. Can you tell us about the 2020 plans for this market? The Oceania region. What can we expect to see here?
Well, it's 2020. It's the future. Of the UFC. In part, is going to be here in Australia. This is an incredible market for us, pound for pound, one of the best in the world, and we're definitely back in Australia in 2020 and 2021 and 2022, and as far as you want to speculate.
Just to talk a little bit about what John was bringing up, just in terms of New Zealand, Dan Hooker, obviously a big name for quite some time in New Zealand, but do you believe a guy like, obviously Israel's the champion, but do you believe a guy like Dan Hooker could himself potentially headline a fight night card in New Zealand sometime in 2020?
Absolutely. Take a look at Israel Adesanya. Only been in the UFC for a relatively short period of time. He's now a champion, and we're talking about, more stadium shows in the future. Obviously, he just did one, headline one today. So, the answer is of course, and great win for Hooker tonight.
recently we saw through some of the stuff that came up through the antitrust lawsuit, talking about the UFC's plan and assuring investors that we can keep fighter portion of revenues at 20% or below. I mean, when you compare it to other sports leagues where the split is a lot closer to 50-50, do you think 20% is fair as a percentage of revenue for the fighters?
You know, I'd really love to answer that question, but, you know, unfortunately we're involved in this lawsuit, and, you know, the lawyers who run this case have asked that they be the only ones that comment on it, but got some great answers for you. Unfortunately, not at privy to give them to you right now.
So when the lawsuit's over, we could expect those answers?
You know, when the lawyers say it's cool for me to talk about it, but trust me, I'm eager to talk about it and answer that question. I could spend about 30 minutes explaining to you a lot of things about it, but unfortunately I'm not in a position to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi there. First of all, just confirming that is a UFC world record crowd, correct?
I believe it is, yes.
Yeah, no. What do you think the future is for Robert Whittaker now?
Well, you heard it from him. I mean, he's not going away. You know, he was a great champion, a great representative for Australia, a great representative for the sport and for the UFC. So you heard it from him. He's not going away. I said I'll leave that one up to Dana and the matchmakers, and of course Robert and his team to decide, you know, what are his next moves in the UFC.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Lawrence.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.